All right. Good evening and welcome back. This segment is going to be talking about how white and Black parents talk to their children about racism. I'm going to hand it off to Todd Mealy and Lauren Creighton to introduce themselves. And then at the end of the session, there will be a period of time for questions and answers. Thank you.
Jasmine, thanks for having me here as a part of the YWCA's program tonight with Extra Give. Thanks all of you for being on the call. I'm excited about being here. I was able to connect with the YWCA about a half a year ago, and I always appreciate the opportunity to do an event. I guess my first connection, Jasmine, with the organization was back in 2010. I had donated a podium, and I wonder if it's still there. So next year, if we're out of this kind of environment, maybe you're doing an event in the building, and I can see if you're still using the podium. But nonetheless, as Jasmine mentioned, my name is Todd Mealy. I'm a 19-year educator. I've taught in public schools, the high school level for all 19 years, 2 school districts in Lancaster County. My career started at School District Lancaster, where I taught at McCaskey High School from 2001 until 2007. And then I've been at Penn Manor School District at the high school there since 2007 to present. I also teach evenings at Dickinson College. I've done that for 3 years. Everywhere I teach American history, but also at Penn Manor, I teach a seminar on race and gender, and I've done that for 4 years. And at Dickinson, I also teach a course called The History of Race, Gender, and American Sports. Beyond teaching, I am the founder and director of the Equity Institute for Race Conscious Pedagogy. We carry a mission to provide educators and anyone outside of education that wants help making their classrooms or school buildings or their organizations race conscious. So we provide resources and tools to help people do that. We provide consulting, curriculum writing services. We're a research institute, so we often do climate studies, equity audits, and we have a publishing house. So we help folks that like to write, that are looking for a way to get their research out to the public. So we serve people in that way as well. So in short, that's my background. I'll pause for a minute, Lauren.
How you doing? Well, Jasmine, thank you for inviting me to this. I have been for the last 15, 16 years off and on working with juvenile delinquents in a rehab. Currently, I'm working in a rehab in the counseling field. Also account manager at Flipper Magazine. That's basically it. Not as long of an introduction as you, Todd, but yeah, that's basically.
Hey, thanks, Lauren. I look forward to the conversation we're going to have later in the fellowship that will develop. Jasmine asked me to speak tonight for about 20, 30 minutes, just about my experience raising white kids. So I have 2 children, ages 6 and 3. One is in kindergarten. My son is in kindergarten. My daughter is in preschool. So I'm going to share some of my experiences tonight and get about a 30-minute time period. And then Lauren and I will be happy to take any questions that anybody has. So again, I want to thank everybody for being here. I'm going to share my screen here to start. And I'm a classroom instructor. I'm used to being interrupted. The venue we're here, no one can really unmute themselves, I guess, and ask me questions. I would like to make this interactive, but I just don't think we have the ability to do that right now, Jasmine. So I'm going to put up on the screen here a letter that was written by Pierce Teft. It was an open letter written to his son just 2 days after the violence that we all witnessed in Charlottesville, Virginia, back in 2017. So I'm going to read this letter. And if I were in a classroom, I'd ask students, so I'm going to ask all of you to answer this question, and then maybe we can come back to it later. But the question is there a line here that sticks out to you? And if there is, why is it like that? So maybe if you're in Facebook, you type something in, and maybe even Jasmine could see your comments here, but I'm looking for you to find one particular line from this letter. And this is Paris Teft writing an open letter really to his son, who was involved with the alt-right demonstrations on August the 11th and August 12th of 2017. So here's an abridged version of the letter. He writes, "My name is Paris Teft, and I'm writing to all with regards to my youngest son, Peter Teft, an avowed white nationalist who has been featured in a number of local news stories over the last several months. On Friday night, my son traveled to Charlottesville, Virginia, and was interviewed by a national news outlet while marching with reported white nationalists who allegedly went on to kill a person. I, along with all of his siblings and his entire family, wish to loudly repudiate my son's vile, hateful, and racist rhetoric and actions. We do not know specifically where he learned these beliefs. He did not learn them at home. Evidently, Peter has chosen to unlearn these lessons, much to my and my family's heartbreak and distress. We've been silent up until now, but now we see that this was a mistake. It was the silence of good people that allowed the Nazis to flourish the first time around, and it is the silence of good people that is allowing them to flourish now. Peter Teft, my son, is not welcome at our family gatherings any longer. His hateful opinions are bringing hateful rhetoric to his siblings, his cousins, nieces, nephews, as well as his parents. Please, son, renounce the hate, accept and love all." Now, again, is there a line in there that sticks out to you? Let me move that to the side, and let me come back to that in a couple minutes. The next thing I want to show you was a viral story of a couple years ago. A few years ago, it's a heartwarming story of two 5-year-old kids who were best friends, one white, one black, who wanted to surprise their teacher on the first day of school by making themselves look like twins, so to become indistinguishable in the teacher's eye. So they decided to cut their hair the same, and then go to school and believe that their teacher wouldn't be able to tell them apart. So I actually want to show you a clip. So let me share my screen again so you can see the clip. I believe my sound is shared, but maybe Jasmine, you can tell me if you can't hear it on your end.
Two pint-sized peas in a pod.
How long have you two boys known each other?
400 years. Bro.
Jax Rosebush on the right, Reddy Weldon on the left. And their 5-year-old hijinks is all the buzz. It started here in the barber's chair.
I said, "You need your hair cut," and he said, "Well, I'm not getting a haircut unless I can get it cut like Reddy's."
That's because the boys wanted to play a trick. Jack's mom posted on Facebook he said he couldn't wait to go to school so that his teacher wouldn't be able to tell them apart.
Who came up with that idea?
Crayons?
At the Christian Academy of Louisville, Miss April played right along, even switching the boys' cots at nap time.
They were so excited, and they wanted to trick me and trick their friends, so, I had to play along.
Reddy and his brother were orphans from the Congo, adopted as babies.
He knows that he doesn't look exactly like Daddy. We teach that's a very valuable thing. Adoption's something to be celebrated. Diversity's something to be celebrated.
Push my head. Do my hair. Pushy.
It's got a good feel to it.
And what do the moms and dads think of the haircut scene round the world?
It doesn't matter what somebody looks like on the outside, it's what's on the inside that matters.
Maybe we have it all wrong and we should listen to the kids a little more.
We play along and we love each other.
For this inseparable pair, friendship is a bond that transcends all. Kevin Tibbles, NBC News, Louisville.
Ready, Sam?
Yeah.
Give me one moment. Okay. So that's a loving story of a friendship of, two young 5-year-olds. You know, I mentioned before that it does warm the heart to see. I mean, it made me smile, and I've seen that video a number of times. But I want to push back against the message of that. It's just, I guess, my way of thinking, being in the field that I'm in. And I warn you in advance that, like, I will weave in and out of like some academic talk with some personal narrative in the 30 minutes that I have. But the reason why I want to push back is because I think the story presents itself as evidence that color blindness or colorblind parenting is the best way to raise white kids in particular. And even the mom, in not so much that video, but in the news reports after, I mean, she said that she sees this whole thing as a testament for her ability to raise her kids with the mantra that not just that all people are equal, but, you know, all people are treated equally in society. And that's where I find that's what I find troubling, because what I argue, and folks in your questions are welcome to push back on this if you'd like to, but what I argue is that in the future, a friendship like that can erode. And so what I mean by that is, if the message to your kids at 4 and 5 is color blindness, and you're sticking with that when the kid is now 14 and 15, and then now they're an adult out of the household, what happens to that friendship between the white boy and the black boy when people are now having different lived experiences at an older age? And will the white child become someone who's deemed untrustworthy in that friendship if they're now dismissing the lived experiences of his black friend? You know, there was a study that was done in 2006 that traced 100 parents that committed to the idea of colorblind parenting. And near the end of the study, the researchers actually pulled the children aside and asked the children, so after years of getting this message, do your parents like black people? And 36% of the children said, oh, we don't know. While 14% of the children said simply, no, they don't. So even in a household like that, what message is being given to the kids if the parents are refusing to talk about race with them, to talk about cultural and racial differences with them? You know, over half of the children in a survey, you know, again, responded that they either didn't know if their parents liked black people, or they simply didn't like black folks. So what do you do with when you're taught your entire life two things? One is from the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal. And then the other is the Martin Luther King quote coming from his famous promissory note speech, which is better known as his I Have a Dream speech in August of 1963, that I don't want to be judged by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. That is interpreted often in educational settings and in parenting as a colorblind comment. I don't think that's what King intended. I think what King intended with that comment was, I'd love for you to judge me on my character, but I don't want you to see me as a stereotype. And if there's no discussions about this kind of perception in the world, then children will develop those stereotypes at young ages, for the most part, because white folks are kind of isolated from racial stress and live and go into white spaces kind of all the time. So if those stereotypes are never disrupted as a child, and then again, as one grows into an adult, then that colorblind messaging really is just abstract, you know, and it creates problems in the future. And that's where I go back to that Teft letter. So let me share my screen again. And what line sticks out to me is this line: we've been silent up until now. And I think that is the subtext of this whole letter. And I think it's really the thesis of my presentation tonight, is that this idea about being color silent is the wrong approach to parenting here in 2020. Let me give you some statistics on this. So if you apply that idea with statistics that have come out by the Southern Poverty Law Center and the FBI over the last few years, what we're seeing is that there's been a 17% increase in hate crime violence since 2016. In the last year, the FBI reported that there's a decrease in the number of hate crimes, but the violent acts of hate crime has increased even within the last year from 2018 to 2019. 2020's numbers haven't come out yet. 51% of hate crime murders occurred, or 51 murders occurred in 2019. Over 7,000 hate crimes were committed in 2019, again, up from 2018. 79% believe that race relations is worse since Obama's election. 65% believe it's common to openly express racist views in public since 2016. So it's becoming more common and more acceptable to say racist things in public. And then that's perpetuated by the idea that over 50% of whites say that they won't live in a community where at least 30% of the residents are people of color. So what I've done then, is offer this idea of color conscious parenting. So I mentioned I'm getting into the academic stuff, and I'm a historian really by trade. So I want to get into a little bit of history here to start. And I hearken back to in 1950, the baby doll study that was conducted by Kenneth and Mamie Clark, two sociologists, whose study was then used in the Brown v. Board decision. So what you had happen in 1950 is you had the Clarks. They pulled in over 250 Black children between the ages of 3 and 7, and they asked them a series of questions. They put in front of them 2 dolls, one Black doll, one white doll. Keeping in mind there weren't Black dolls at the time, so they had to paint a Black doll brown. And they asked them a series of questions, and those questions was starting as simple as, which doll is the white doll? Which doll is the Black doll? But which doll would you rather play with? Which doll is the misbehaving doll? Which doll is the ugly doll? Which doll looks most like you? And what they found in this study is that the children, come the end of the study, 67% of the children preferred to play with the white doll. And again, these are all Black children that were asked these questions. 59% of the children considered the white doll the nice doll. 59% of the children thought that the Black doll looked, quote, bad. And 60% favored white dolls over Black dolls. So the questions that the Clarks asked were designed to unmask preference. But there was a portion of the questions that revealed knowledges of racial differences and to record how children were self-identifying. So the doll test was an attempt to study the development of sense of self-esteem in young children. And that study was then used by Thurgood Marshall in the 1954 Brown v. Board case, and the judges, which ruled unanimously to desegregate public schools, agreed with the argument. Chief Justice Earl Warren says that the Jim Crow culture, the Jim Crow system, which created separate worlds for whites and for Blacks in the South, and including some residential Jim Crow policy in the North, created an innate feeling of inferiority among Black and brown people in the country. That's what the judge said. Now we can, if we had more time, talk about that ruling in itself, the language in that. But that's how it's looked at in history. What I like to do is flip that and say, well, if the Jim Crow system creates a sense of inferiority among Black people, what does it do to white people? And what I contend it does is it emboldens racism in white people, particularly children who then grow into adults. And you can imagine if this is all they see their entire life from 4 or 5 years old, and now they're 20, 30, 40 years old, they're stuck in the ways if they're never challenged on that, raised in colorblind households. So who tested this? It wasn't a sociologist, it was a school teacher. In 1968, the day after Martin Luther King was killed, Jane Elliott, a young school teacher in Riceville, Iowa, she conducted her own study with her students in 3rd grade, something like 28 white students in third grade, where she separated her students between with eye color, brown-eyed students versus blue-eyed students. In the first day of her experiment, she made the blue-eyed students the superior people in her classroom. And she put collars around the brown-eyed students in the class, and the blue-eyed students got all the privileges. They got extra attention from her, the teacher. They got as much water as they wanted to drink out of the water cooler. That was a big deal to third graders. They got extra playtime at recess. They got an extended lunch period, and they got extra attention when it came to the schoolwork. And the flip side of that is the brown-eyed students, who were now the second-class citizens in that classroom, they performed lower on the assessments and the tests that day. And the next day, when they were made the superior group in the classroom, they performed better on the tests. So that notion of stereotype threat applied right there in the classroom. And at lunchtime, it resulted in a fight, as one of the brown or blue-eyed children called one of the brown-eyed children brown eye. The slur of the day. And that resulted in a physical altercation of students on the playground. Now, I don't think there's any way a school teacher can get away with this today, but fortunately, this study is recorded. And it had a significant impact in the way that people look at power, privilege, and in this case, race. So I take these cases here, and I look at additional studies that have been done with young children. And here's some notes on those studies. The first study was conducted by a bunch of researchers at Harvard. Bazar and Benaji, the one who ultimately would create the implicit association test that you can find online. What she did is she studied 263 children between the ages of 3 and 14. And she studied skin color bias in these kids. She showed the kids graphically drawn facial images in different skin tones, from very light skin to dark brown. And she asked the children to describe the faces as happy and the faces as angry. And the children described black faces overall as being angry and white faces as being happy, even when white faces bore frowns. So her test shows a pro-white bias among an interracial group of over 200 children. Then in 2017, there was a study done at the University of Toronto at what was called the Jackson Institute for Child Studies. And this team of researchers, they studied 6 to 10-month-old children. And what they asked these 6 to 10-month-old children to do is really to examine them so they can study in-group versus out-group biases that exist. So these kids, they watched videos of female adults with neutral face expressions, but when they would appear on the screen, music would play. So it combined facial expressions with music. So you had a combination of music, happy music being played with white faces, sad music being played with white faces, happy music with black faces, and sad music with black faces. And it showed that the infants looked longer at own race faces when paired with even sad music. So this study showed that there is an association with in-group members with positivity, positive, happy music, and then and out-group members with negativity. And then a third study conducted by the same research team, they looked at bias towards those who was teaching them. So teaching them about life skills, teaching them in a classroom, teaching them at childcare, whatever it might be. And this study is going to show, as they studied 6 to 8 month old infants again, they were looking at infants who commonly followed a gaze as a woman would show up on the screen and an animal would show up on the screen, and they would follow where the woman would look. Sometimes the woman would look at the animal, sometimes she would look away from the animal. And the children in this study, they always followed the woman where her eyes went. Like, in other words, the infants commonly followed the gaze of members of their own race rather than the gaze of other race people, no matter where that animal would appear on the screen. So the study suggests that infants are more inclined to learn from own race adults than from other race adults. And there are more studies, but the how does this apply to me as a parent then? Knowing this history, knowing these studies, I can't ignore these. So I had to become conscious in the way that I've raised my two children. So just a little bit about myself. I'm from Harrisburg, a PA. I grew up in the city. I have a brother and a sister, an older brother and a younger sister. My sister is Korean, and we assumed that she was experiencing, she had the same life experiences that my brother and I had. You know, her last name was Mealy. She lived in a white household. She went to the same school that we went to. We went to the most, or we for the most part, we went to the same social places. So we just assumed that her life was like ours. And when she hit 18 and then went off to college, there was a fracture in our family. And we didn't know what was going on. And she'd stopped talking to us for about a year. And that caused alarm with me. And I wanted to figure out what was going on. And I'm about 4 years older than her. And it turned out that, you know, she was experiencing things that we didn't experience. When she would leave our household, didn't matter what her last name was, doesn't matter who her parents were, her brother was, she was always racially othered. She dealt with being stereotyped and hearing slurs and everything. And she would come home and not have anybody to talk to. She lived in a colorblind household, right? With parents not saying anything to her, trying to help her with her issues. And she was going through an identity crisis at the time. And she had no one to help her with that. So her story woke me up to these issues. And now that I have my own children, right, I want to be proactive, and my wife, we want to be proactive in creating a diverse environment for them that also understands the notion of inclusion. So we proactively do things at our house, like we have dolls of color all throughout the house. We have books that feature Black children in them. So we take them places that are typically out of our comfort zone. So we're conscious of the way that we raise our kids. So if they're in white spaces, they're still getting exposure, and we're just trying to disrupt stereotypes before they develop. But we understand that's not easy, because there are studies that show that these problems just don't develop in the household, but they also develop in daycare and preschool and kindergarten as children go out and they're mingling among their peers of their own age. What I've just not long ago in 2019, the University of Chicago, in partnership with Sesame Street, released a study which showed that how much white parents avoid talking to their kids about race, and how much white teachers avoid talking about race to their students. And what this study showed is that 10% of white parents talk to their kids often. 25% talk to their children sometimes. But then overwhelmingly, you're seeing 34 and 33% of white parents talk to their kids either never or rarely, respectively. And then with teachers are saying that 61% believe that race is an inappropriate topic to talk about in their classroom, so they avoid the topic. 72% that schools discourage, so the administrations, they discourage or provide no guidance on how teachers should be talking to their students about race. So we're talking in white households, and now in predominantly white schools, we have this issue of color blindness, and it has not helped the state of race relations in the country, here in 2020. So what's wrong with colorblind parenting? I put up here three points that I want to talk about a little bit. Okay, the first issue is that colorblindness distorts our, meaning white parents' ability to talk to our children about what they're actually seeing. Right, our kids do see color, as the aforementioned studies have said, and parents won't know what's going on in their children's lives if they're assuming color blindness. The second thing is that white parents, when we see our children, when we say to our children that we don't see the things that you're actually seeing, and the children think that they can, they can't talk to their parents about what they're seeing, they draw conclusions about what they see in the world without our guidance. I kind of liken this to like sex education. If parents avoid talking to their children about that topic, then where are their children going to learn about sex ed? They're going to see it in pop culture, social media, music, and TV, where it's permeated in all three of those things 24/7. And therefore, that's a miseducation and is a missed opportunity by parents. So that's the second problem. And the third problem with colorblind parenting is that children will develop then a negative reaction to blackness, meaning that this negative perception about different racial groups, it grows into direct refusal to acknowledge what Black communities have said to white folks for generations, whether they're saying that in face-to-face conversations, or you see that in music lyrics, or if you see it on television programs or what it might be, then those white children will grow up in denial. And the issue of policing or over policing Black communities is a perfect example of that. If my children grow up in a community that is not policed at all, it's a overwhelmingly white space, and we don't see police ever in our community, and be that their Black friend is trying to tell them that there's an issue, and my child has been told all men are created equal their entire life, knowing that when that was said, people were enslaved. There was an effort to vanquish the indigenous race, and women couldn't even vote. They're not considering those things. Then my child is going to dismiss those issues that exist. And that's, I think, the fracture that we have today. So I don't want to say problems and not give you any solutions. So kind of in closing to my little talk here is I do want to give some parents some things to think about. One is that use race conscious language. Okay, talk to your kids about the terms that non-dominant cultural and racial groups want to be called. Get them comfortable saying African American, saying Black, saying Asian, saying Latino, Latinx. Get them comfortable using race conscious language would be one. Two, take your children and yourself out of your comfort zones and visit places that are different than what you're used to. Walk around the city, go to grocery stores that are tailored towards, say, like Indian shoppers. Travel when things clear up. Travel to places you don't typically go. And think about those spaces even virtually that you can take your kids to. About 3 years ago, my son and I go to the movies. We used to go to the movies every weekend. We did it from like he was 2 until coronavirus shut down the movie theaters. And the here in Lancaster, there's the Jimmy right next to the movie theater, and I wanted to take my son there before a movie, and I knew what was going to happen. Our waitress was going to come to our table and she was going to ask us for our order, and my son was going to realize that her accent was different than ours, and that's exactly what happened. And my response wasn't, "Shh, that's rude." My response was, "And that's a beautiful accent, isn't it? So let's talk about where that accent comes from." And this is including my sister, who is Korean, but speaks with, an American accent. So he's never heard that before. So a lot of white parents try to evade the topic because it's uncomfortable for them. It's not, these issues are not uncomfortable for the kids. These issues are uncomfortable for the parents. So the parents have to break that discomfort to broach these topics with their kids. The third thing that I had there is be intentional about breaking stereotypes, showing your kids, especially your younger kids, like stereotype busting representations. I mentioned about how we have dolls of color throughout our house. Okay, but you also want to show representations of Black pilots, female doctors, whatever it might be. So try to be proactive before those stereotypes set in. Number 4, speak to your children about racial diversity as much as you talk to them about emotional development. I've mentioned that kids are not too young and they want to talk about these things. So you don't want to leave them to try to figure out the world themselves. Have you shown your kids the video of what happened at Central Park this summer? And I bet if you show them that story, like the video of that story, they're going to have questions. And even if you don't have the answers, you're with your child, you can look it up. You can look up answers. But I think you'll be surprised to find out what your child knows about racial differences, what your child doesn't know, and then what the two of you can work on to improve knowledge. So I wouldn't be hesitant to bring up these issues to your children. And then the last thing is, and then Jasmine, I'll be done, is challenge your schools. Challenge your schools to become race conscious institutions. To commit to some form of diversity attribute that goes into every class that's offered, no matter what the curriculum is. Okay, or a school that will commit to creating some form of race studies course, diversity studies course, ethnic studies course. I would challenge your school to do this, because if the idea is that we need to train our students for a world after high school, beyond college, then a school that's committed to that kind of classroom curricular equity is also going to better the teacher. So if you want the students to develop these social skills, then the teachers will also be challenged to develop the same type of knowledge and skills as well. So I would challenge the school district that you live in to have that same kind of commitment to race consciousness. Okay, so I appreciate the attention. I went a little bit over my time here, but Jasmine, when appropriate, I'm happy to take any questions.
You're awesome. Thank you so much, Todd. I truly appreciate everything that you said. And some of the questions that I got, you have answered, but I'm still going to ask them because maybe you have a different view based on the wording that it was said. The first question I'm going to gear towards Lauren, and it says, how early is too early to begin talking about race?
You hear me? Okay. Well, personally for me, I probably started, I have a little girl, she's 7 years old. One of the things I noticed about myself growing up, there wasn't a lot of like representation in terms of like just things you play with, like I grew up with G.I. Joes and He-Man, and obviously weren't black dolls. And so my daughter, before she could even start talking, I was big on making sure any of the dolls we had in the house, me and her mom, looked like her, or looked like at least represented her mom. So things such as Barbies, we make sure we got black Barbies or any type of dolls that were of color. And I started talking to her, I would say, gosh, when she can talk. Because unlike one thing about raising a black child, you don't really have the luxury of being able to live in a colorblind household, because from day one, she's gonna notice that my skin looks different from any peer she has at school, anybody, just in the natural sense, she's gonna look, her skin's different from the world around her. So I think as early as maybe 1, I started talking to her to let her know that just because your skin was darker didn't mean that you were less of, you weren't, doesn't mean you weren't as smart, doesn't mean you weren't as, you couldn't achieve the same things because of your skin. One of the things we do each night, I've been doing it for 4 years now. We say affirmations in the mirror before she goes to bed, and maybe when she wakes up, and they pertain to her being proud to be a black little girl in America. We've been doing that, I want to say about 4 years we've been doing that. So that way she understands that just because she's not, her hair is not as long or as silky as her classmates, or her skin isn't as light, she's still beautiful, she's still intelligent, she's still, again, like I said, she can accomplish anything that her non-black counterparts can accomplish. I would kind of say, I guess, at birth, but yeah, I'm gonna answer it.
Jasmine, is that something you want me to respond to, or do you have a different question?
Yeah, I'm curious. It was geared towards Lauren, but I would love for you to respond as well.
Okay, all right. Lauren, I appreciate your answer there. So when is too young? That's the question, right? I don't think anyone is too young. It's a matter of how you approach it. So, for example, I started to talk to Carter, my 6-year-old, about race at some point when he was 3. I forget exactly when. But part of that is, we were doing things that I don't know if most 3-year-olds do. Like I was putting him in a lot of just kind of like older adolescent situations. I was coaching football at the time, and he spent a lot of time around the football team. So that would then warrant me to have conversations with him. He turned 4 into 5, and he made me a big Avengers fan. So like I would take him to like movies like Ant-Man, and then some of the others, and we would have conversations about, there's sometimes I'm gonna cover your eyes, and you're gonna hear some language, and if you never hear mom or dad say those words, you'll never hear. I don't want to hear you say those words, and if you do, we'll stop doing this. We'll stop going to these movies. And he has never violated any of that because I was candid. But to go back directly to answer that question, when I talk to my son about race, like for instance, this past spring and summer, he would sit there and listen to me. He wouldn't look at me. He would get goofy, like a 4-year-old would. He would fidget around, and when he had an opportunity to speak, he would say something that was unrelated to what I was talking about. But Jasmine, he knew what I was getting at, and it hit. So there's now times when, he's comfortable saying black, and he's comfortable calling someone an African American, and he's comfortable with those things now, and that means that there's progress that's being made. He's listening, to me. And my daughter just turned 3, so like now we're starting that with her. But I tell you this, and sorry if I'm Lauren, if I'm end up monopolizing the time here. Let me just say this though, like one of the big things I'm concerned about, Jasmine and Lauren, is not so much the race thing now, because we've been really proactive. Where I failed at in Carter's early years, where I think, is talking to him about gender and sex difference. So my son's sexist, right? So he has a problem with pink because it's feminine. His sister likes pink. He doesn't. We used to love Moana, and he won't watch that now because it's a woman, a female. So like he has sexist thoughts, and he doesn't get them in the house. He gets them, at his sitter and at school. So we're trying to disrupt all that, So that's what we're working on doing now.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing up that conversation also about gender. That is a conversation that we talked about earlier today, and it definitely feeds into the household and how we raise our children. Todd, I have another question that is specific to you being able to answer, and it says, they're asking, how do I talk about white privilege to my 16-year-old?
So for those that have trouble doing that, what I always suggest is not like an abstract conversation. You want to put a text in front of people and allow that text to guide the conversation. So like your 16-year-old, if you can find something that you can read, if your 16-year-old is interested in sports, then, what was his name? The NBA basketball player wrote an article in like ESPN magazine called White Privilege. So you can tie sports to the conversation if you want to do that. But it doesn't have to be related to sports, obviously. But if you find a text, long, short, it could be a reading, it could be a video clip, and it could be something that clearly happened, this summer. It could be something with policing. It could be political. But if you find a text, and you're uncomfortable, if you find a text, the both of you spend some time on that. What you can do is have a conversation about the text, okay? And in that way, you're touching on the issues that you want to get at when having a conversation about privilege. And what I would say is, like, you want to hit on things like race is a construct, so that needs to be explained, and how that construct has created a hierarchy. And that hierarchy has moved, the purpose of that hierarchy than is to privilege some people over other people. So you give that kind of contextual background, which will then lead you to the conversation on privilege. And then you can start to see the disparities that exist in choose an institution. You know, like I work at a school where every teacher in the building looks like me, right? So this idea about institutional inequity, you know, that's something that's done even unknowingly, you know, until someone puts that in front of them. So I think the text-based conversations will help you with your son.
Thank you. I have a question, and it seems like you already touched on this a little bit, but it's a question that's asking, you mentioned school systems. How do you push back when they're not teaching all history as a parent? How do I step in? Yep.
Is that for Lauren? You want Lauren to answer that one, or is that for me?
Lauren can start, and then I would, you both can answer. Yep.
Okay.
It's actually a good question. I talk to my daughter's teacher a lot. I don't know if I bug her, but I just want to make sure my daughter's doing all right in school. And I've never actually talked about a more diverse curriculum to her, but I kind of brung up when we had I haven't actually met her yet because of COVID. I haven't actually been able to meet her in person. So it's been more through either Zoom or an app called Class Dojo. And I did ask her one time about, because the curriculum they're doing right now in second grade is just basically science, math, and they have a little bit of history. And I kind of touched on the fact that because of my daughter being home and me doing a lot of stuff with her at home, I've been having her watch a lot of videos on just different Black history on my own, just different people in Black history, whether it's civil rights leaders, whether it's pioneers in medicine. And I kind of briefly said to her, is that's when they do talk about history, are they going to just be touching on, you know, basic things like George Washington, or, you know, just the basic things? Or are they going to go into more of Black people besides just Martin Luther King? And she didn't kind of give me any type of answer, but she did give me some of my own, she did give me my resources on my own that I can kind of be able to do things on my own. So I don't know if that answers the question in terms of pushback, but that's what she did to me when I talked to her myself. She kind of gave me some resources, and I've been trying to use those resources.
I'll let Todd answer, and I'll feel free to chime in as well on an extent of pushback. Thank you, Lauren.
Okay, now I guess I could filibuster on this one too. I'm going to try to be very succinct here, Jasmine, so you can get another question in. The teacher the parent is a taxpayer that sends their kid to a school, does have a right to talk to the educator about what stories and content is being taught in a class. I would advise that is done in a respectful way, really just to inquire, but not so much to challenge the educator. But I'll say this, like a lot of white educators are not ready to create a more of a diverse curriculum. Why? Because even educators my age weren't prepared for that, right? I went through a colorblind system. I went to a really good teaching college, and I didn't sit and take a multicultural class with teaching or diversity class with teaching. And that's a lot of professions. Lawyers, the same thing. But probably until recently, even educators never even thought to try to diversify their curriculum. I do believe that this form of cultural responsiveness can occur no matter what discipline we're talking about. It can happen in science classes. The teaching style can change in math classes to become more responsive. Clearly, social studies, it can and should be done. because that's the place where you have the flexibility to really create more of a multicultural class, if that's what you're looking for. So my advice to the parents, because that's the question, is to shoot an email and just ask, just inquire what the teacher is doing, because just that inquiry is going to cause an alarm of the teacher for them to take some action. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that that's going to be sustained, but the teacher, at least it's on their mind to try to create more representation in their classroom. Maybe the teacher does it in one lesson and it never comes back to it, right? That's a whole different issue. But I would challenge the educator to really conduct a content analysis of their curriculum. So to take a look at every resource that's used in your class, so both like the school board approved textbook, but then any other additional text that you might be using in the course, and analyze that. In other words, break it down by racial representation, break it down by gender representation, and so forth. And you can actually compile the numbers, and you can see how good of a job you're doing by including various voices and various stories in your course.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I was going to mention, I don't want to take up too much space because I have a really good question that was submitted that I want to get to. But I personally sit on the PAC board in the district. So being a part of that parent board gives me more voice to leverage things that I can advocate for other parents that should be put in place. So I would say that's position one is to make sure that you are involved in the school. In some way, that you're in contact with people that can be change makers to get that put in place. So being involved in a school, one. Two, I love how you said go in it nicely as well, because this is a question that could go to the board, and you want to make sure that when you're bringing it to the board that you've also looked at what other districts are doing, so that you can say this is happening, this is not a new thing, it's not something that is non-existent, and obviously it's something that's needed, so that you can bring a greater demand and also bring evidence as to why it should be in place. We will be doing a equity and education segment later on tonight at 8 o'clock, so I know that we'll be touching on this as well. Adam put in our chat box, it takes a lot of work. Parents need an entourage. Radicalize your play groups. Yeah, I agree. All right. So this next question that we received, it says, I want my child to be an anti-racist and not complacent. I'm also a work in progress because I've been complacent in situations and never called an ally. I'm learning all of this recently. Can we journey together? Should I solely work on myself before I work on this with my child?
Who's that for?
Whoever wants to take that one. That's open.
Lauren, I talked last. I'll let you go, but I'll be happy to answer. Okay, I'll go first. You want me to go first? Okay, all right. So listen, Jasmine, and to the person that asked the question, I guess that's the ultimate question, is what can one do? Now, first, I think you have to realize that this is an ongoing thing. I talked about my son and him, being sexist, but like, it is like to challenge yourself with racial presumptions, racist presumptions, sexist presumptions, ableism, ageism. Your bias towards people that are overweight. Like you constantly have to challenge yourself on all of this. I was once on a plane. I was traveling in China, and I flew from one city to the next, and so I got on a Chinese airline. I walked on board the plane. I look in the cockpit, and there's two Chinese pilots, and I'm like scared to fly as it is already. And I'm like, this plane is going down. I had never seen Chinese pilots before, Asian pilots before. I've only seen white pilots. And so right then in that moment, I knew that bias was surfacing, right? So then I defeat it. But I think that's a big part of this is the idea that when you feel these biases surfacing, you disrupt them so it doesn't create discriminatory behavior. And part of that is your level of self-education. And to understand the nuances of race is very complicated. because it's just not read a book and you figure things out. Like you can't read Kendi's book and say, all right, I'm good to go. It's read it again, and then also find him online and listen to him talk, and then find articles, but then find all the other things. So it's like this form a constellation of sources around this notion of anti-racism, and then you can understand these nuanced items like housing segregation has a lot to do with inequities in education today. Like if you don't know that part, then you don't know why there's inequities that exist in education today, right? So it's a constant, sustained effort to continue to educate yourself. Okay, and in the process, you can look for others, but all for help and to have discussions with and better your knowledge that way, because you do want a diversity of voices around you that's going to help you kind of frame the way that you see the world and how you can behave as an anti-racist. But really, it's a sustained effort. So it's nothing that you can do overnight or even in a short period of time. I've been researching, writing, and studying this stuff for 20 years. And I don't know it all. And there's still things that I learned today. So, Lauren?
One thing I can say, as a Black man, if I was to talk to a white person, is to listen. As a man, there's I guess we all have like some sort of small amount of privilege. Like I'm a big man, so there's certain things that I'll talk to some of my female friends about, and I won't necessarily get it because I'm big. There's not many, like, for instance, me just going out late at night to take a walk. I've had some of my female friends like, can't believe you're going to do that. I can't. And I look at them like, it's just taking a walk. But they look at it from a perspective that if I go out late like you go out, there's things that can happen to me. I'm a woman. I can get, I don't think in that. I don't necessarily have the same type of fears that they would have. And when I think of when it comes to a white person, if you have Black people in your life, they might tell you things like, for instance, they might have a bad run-in with the police. And in your mind, you're thinking, well, if you didn't do anything wrong, you wouldn't have nothing to be scared of, to be worried about. You're not necessarily listening to them. You're just saying, well, every time I've had a run-in with the police, it's because I was speeding or I wasn't nervous. I just gave my license, registration, and called it a day. Or even for me personally, if I get pulled over by the cops, if I even see cops, I will sometimes, for no reason, my heart might start racing. I don't have warrants, I don't have anything I've done, but it's just, I'm aware of their presence. And for anybody who wants to say, I guess, be anti-racist, just listening, I guess, being empathetic to what a person of color is saying is usually the first step, because we do even if you live in the same household, like you said with your sister, same household, same world, it's still different. And if you can't even take the time to listen, you'll never get past that first step into being anti-racist.
I see Adam is on here as well. And we also have about 2 minutes. One of the questions I feel like Todd already touched on a little bit. It's asking, how do I get out of my bubble to expose my children to cultural experiences, especially here in Lancaster, PA? Is there anything even happening here? It's COVID, but maybe we can touch on as well about what pre-COVID, what was happening, or other ways to just get out of your bubble again.
I think it's also possible within your bubbles to analyze it through a critical race lens. So if we as parents understand that, like, when you see a movie that has an entirely white cast, even though I'm thinking like the show Friends, entirely white cast in New York City, like there are definitely Black people in New York City. So it's about calling that out and having that conversation with your kids. But I do think absorbing some of that media that is diverse is incredibly important, and pointing it out and saying, look, that Black people are not only represented in this way, but Black people can be anything they want to be, just like you can be. So immediately I think like Doc McStuffins, which, you know, I have a 3-year-old, so like we like watching Doc McStuffins, and we think that's cool. But yeah, it is hard around here, and especially during COVID. But we can keep a critical consciousness in our own brain about the media we are consuming, and we can talk about that with our kids.
Jasmine, am I allowed to respond here too?
Yes.
Yeah, obviously, I said a little bit about this in my talk in the beginning, the front end of this presentation. But as Adam was talking about, you know, what you see on TV, you know, when COVID started, the Trolls 2 movie came out. You know, if you're trying to reach your young children, like that's like the ultimate anti-racist movie, right? You have to see that. I mean, it addresses things like white saviorism. It addresses color. The whole thing is a colorblind story, right? It attacks colorblindness, because that's what Princess Poppy is all about in that movie, and she figures it out in the end, right? So I would recommend that would be one film that you folks could show your young children, if you're looking at that. Being stuck indoors does make it a little difficult to try to diversify your environment. But I think Adam hit it on the head where like you can be proactive. I mean, we have the internet now. So that story with my son, after we had to talk about, you know, the Chinese accent, I got my phone out and we watched stuff about China. You know, so we took a tour of China, you know, while we were eating our dinner. Right. So you can do stuff like that, you know, this day and age. So that would be helpful to folks.
Adam, I'm going to read what you put in the chat box. The Conscious Kid and Sex Positive Families on Instagram are really good accounts to help parents. Awesome.
You know, Jasmine, I think if it doesn't have to be race, you know, and a lot of times when these issues become personal to people, then they start to get it. And then it crosses all those diversity categories or all those intersections, you know, that you talk about. So, you know, if there's something going on and you're having to talk about gender, if you're talking about ability, you know, and then your children, they see that, then maybe not in that moment, but as they get older, they're gonna see the connection between racial oppression and gender oppression and everything else.
Definitely. Thank you. All right. Well, this has been awesome. And I could stay on here forever and continue this conversation, but we have a full lineup still. I believe 2 more sessions. But I just want to thank you, Todd, sincerely from the bottom of my heart. Thank you for being on here tonight. This is a topic that has come up in our racial equity institutes. And so I'm glad that we could tap into it in this atmosphere. Thank you, Lauren, for being a voice as well, and keep trucking along in your parenting journey. And thank you, Adam. You always have my back. So thank you for being here and a voice as well. I'm going to give another plug. We are still in a time period for Extra Give. So if you have not given, please consider giving. If you're not able to give right now, we're on a journey of learning. So continue just to come to YWCA Lancaster for more information. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck today with the Extra Give.